Welcome everyone to today's session. Are 70% of your patients clinically eligible for total joint replacement in ASC? I'm Alan Condon with Becker's ASC Review. We'll begin today's session with a presentation and have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the session by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We look forward to hearing your questions. This session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's session to access the recording. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's session by introducing our presenters. We have Chris Bishop, CEO of Regent Surgical Health. As CEO, Chris oversees the nation's leading surgery center management and development company, and the largest private organization operating physician, hospital, ASC joint venture partnerships. Regent currently owns or operates 27 U.S. facilities, 21 hospital joint ventures, 14 total joint replacement centers, and 3 bundled payment entities. Also joining us is Dr. Jim Ballard, board-certified orthopedic surgeon specializing in adult joint reconstruction. Dr. Ballard was the first to perform outpatient hip replacement in the Pacific Northwest. He received his medical degree from Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, and is a founding partner of Oregon Surgical Institute. Finally, we have Dr. Chris Nansen, a board-certified orthopedic surgeon with a special interest in reconstructive joint surgery with emphasis on hip and knee reconstruction. Dr. Nansen specializes in the direct anterior approach and with the minimally invasive techniques used in hip replacement surgery, and is also a founding partner of Oregon Surgical Institute. At this time, I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Chris to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Alan. It's a real privilege to join 2 partners of ours here, Dr. Ballard and Dr. Nansen from the Oregon Surgical Institute, that we had the privilege to co-develop with them. Or I should say we're invited to help them execute on their vision. What's fascinating about these 2 orthopedic surgeons is they are in competing practices, so they compete for patients, but probably 10 years ago started the discussion around what would it look like if we could just do 20 to 30% of our joint replacements in surgery centers. And 10 years ago, that would have been mind-boggling. But as technology evolved, as technique evolved, and as you will hear, several characteristics of their clinical pathway evolved, we now land here today where we're talking about something that would have been mind-boggling years ago, where as much as 70% of their patients may be eligible for the surgery center setting. So what we're going to do today is really kind of touch on 4 areas on this agenda. Number 1, how did they organize this partnership? Number 2, really creating that center of excellence. What does the physical plant look like? Number 3, establishing the clinical team. How do you build that clinical team that includes anesthesia, the physician partners, nurses, techs, Regent and the business office staff, all the items that go into that. And then finally, number 4, really refining that clinical pathway, because even though this center is only 2 years into existence, the way that we see our physician partners doing things today has even taken measures of success steps forward since we opened 2 years ago. So I think one of the things that most impresses me with this group is it's a constant best in class, and you've got a lot of different physicians that are driving with updated data change, and watching these guys maybe trained 15 years ago one way, use that for 10 years, and then somebody shows up with a better approach. This group manages to organize around this and refine the clinical pathway and continue to improve it. So with that, what I'd like to do is just start by setting the market, because if you're on this call today, you're either contemplating shifting joints into the ambulatory setting, you have shifted joints in the ambulatory setting, but you think we're a little crazy that 70% of our patients could be eligible, or you are a medical device manufacturer trying to figure out how can I ensure that my medical device system can assist these physicians in achieving a high-quality outcome. So the first thing I want to point to here before I open it up for the panel is just to show you, this was an SG2 slide that was put out in 2016 that really showed the doubling through 2026, the doubling of case volume. And what you see here is the light blue those are the inpatient joint replacements. So as you can see, 95% of the joint replacements in 2016 or greater were done on an inpatient basis. Patient was kept overnight at a minimum. And so if you're the CFO of a hospital and you're hearing joint replacement centers are getting set up, you're panicking thinking this is a big revenue driver. But as you can see from this slide, because the market is doubling in terms of the volume, you can see the navy blue here is really the growth, and it's all shifting to the ambulatory setting. So you still have a lot of inpatient volume being performed, but a lot of the growth is occurring on an outpatient basis. I also read earlier this week and was talking with the two surgeons on this panel about Journal of Rheumatology put out a statistic that they believe by 2040 that the volume versus 2020 will actually triple. It makes sense because of the baby boomers and what we kind of refer to as the silver tsunami, 10,000 patients a day shifting onto the Medicare rolls. So as you think through the aging of the American population, you think through the activity of the middle-aged population, you can begin to understand why we're beginning to see such high growth in this space. And if you're a joint replacement surgeon, you're going to be a busy guy or busy lady here for the foreseeable future. The one last thing I would add before to kind of help set the market here is we just heard last week from CMS that they are recommending Medicare joints, hip replacements for the surgery center setting. We saw this with knees in 2019 when they recommended adding it to the ASC list, and by January 1 of 2020, we had Medicare knees eligible for the first time in surgery centers. So it's highly likely that we follow a similar pattern here with hip replacements and see those become eligible for the surgery center in early 2021. So with that, I'm going to open this up. Dr. Ballard, I'm going to come to you first on this. You and Dr. Nansen were really two of the leaders in organizing this group in Portland, Oregon, to organize the physician group, set up the structure by which you guys would govern yourselves or make decisions, begin to choose a company like ours to help you execute on this vision. Talk us through a little bit about how you and Dr. Nansen started that conversation, and then how you began to think through, who do I want in this project with me, and how did you approach those physicians?
So that's an awesome question, and Chris would agree that there's probably a couple of book chapters that would cover that story. Chris and I started collaborating years before outpatient surgery really became even something people were talking about. So we were at the hospital level. Again, as you mentioned, we were competitors, but we knew right off the bat that we were kind of kindred spirits, and that we were very like-minded. We wanted to pursue evidence-based medicine. We knew the power of standardization, and our hospital at the time was anything but standardized. All the protocols, which is the case with most of us, the protocols were all over the map. So we started to hone our protocols early, and then we started to realize, we watched our data. We developed a really strong hospital program. We had data. We knew what our length of stay was doing, and as we standardized and as we got together, our length of stay started to drop. And we started to realize that, man, this is getting to the point where our average length of stay is close to being same day. And so although people weren't talking about it a lot, we thought, man, we could probably do this same day. And so we evolved ahead of it, saw it was being done in a couple of locations. We visited a few people, realized that it was totally doable, and made the jump. And so he and I really worked together very well at the beginning. And, like a lot of people, we know of the other guys, the other doctors in town, and we knew who would be like-minded, and we just started a conversation and kind of gradually grew and coalesced.
And Dr. Nansen, share with us a little bit about sort of those early conversations and how you guys, really thought through, because obviously there were some physicians that you did not invite to this. Either you didn't feel that they were progressive enough or comfortable enough with the concept of outpatient care. And frankly, 5 years ago, when you guys started doing this and sending patients home the same day from the hospital, even that was a bit revolutionary in its approach. But talk us through, because I'm sure you had some partners in your practice saying, you want to do what? You want to partner with who? The guys that we're competing for patients with? Talk us through kind of that mindset.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. We looked at the group that we had. We picked physicians that we knew in the community that were involved in the process of standardization, that were the people that would show up to the meetings, the people that would engage in conversations, the guy that returns your phone call and is interested in collaborating, because we knew, as Dr. Ballard said, that collaboration really was the key. And so, Jim and I were at meetings together once or twice a month for years, trying to standardize these protocols. And what we did as the two guys in our specific hospital that we were the kind of the driver of volume, we started doing these things. We documented our results. We documented our length of stay, our narcotics utilization, our pain scores, our readmission rates, all of the things that you need to do to establish that you have a successful program. And then we were able to bring that data to our colleagues, the collaborators that we knew in the community. And we were able to say, listen, this is what we've been able to do in the hospital. The next revolution here is moving joint replacement into the outpatient arena. And so, we would like to collaborate with you if you're willing to do this in order to pull off basically an orthopedic total joint center with less than 23-hour stay. But you're right. It's interesting when some of your partners are your partners across multiple entities, and when we're at our surgery center and I've got partners that are in 6 other orthopedic groups. And so, it sounds challenging, and I know in a lot of settings and in a lot of practice settings that is very challenging. But the group that we assembled across those 6 or 7 groups had been collaborating across multiple fronts anyway. And so, like I said, it was really just kind of a selection of like minds with people that really believe in evidence-based practice, that know the power of standardization, and people, quite honestly, that'll show up and help you do the work. Because we still have meetings on a regular basis to revise our protocols. If there's something that one of us wants to change, we have a text string built into all of our cell phones, and we text each other. What do you think about this? Do we need to revisit this? I saw an article. We still share data and evidence, and we modernize our protocols as time goes on. So, but it was really more the spirit of collaboration rather than what group you're in. That was really what was important.
Chris, one of the deciding factors was something that's really hard, I think, is I've met surgeons from other states that wanted to do this. Some people have this odd unwillingness to collaborate and to standardize, like, oh, this is the way, I'm fellowship trained at Mass General, or I went to, whatever, the Cleveland Clinic, and this is how we do it. And instead of a willingness to collaborate, and the power in this is being able to go, look, the way you do it might be different than how I do it. Maybe your way's better than my way. And if you prove me better, then we'll collaborate. And that's one of the ways we chose this. People self-selected who's willing to sit at the table and give up what you consider to be a sacred cow if we convince you to give it up. So that was one of the ways I think we self-selected into this.
Yeah, I heard you guys refer to yourselves as, like Abe Lincoln's cabinet. You refer to yourselves as sort of a band of rivals. Dr. Ballard, how many joint surgeons do you now, because I know once you opened this facility, you had other joint surgeons in the community kind of raise their hand and say, hey, I see what you guys are doing over there. There's something different. Can I come over and see this? Can I scrub in? Can I get credentialed and start using it? And after a couple experiences, they're asking, how many shares might you make available for me? How many surgeons do you have now that are performing joint replacements at OSI, and from how many different practices?
I'm just trying to count it up. I think we might be at 9 from 5 practices, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Your band of rivals comment is great, because I I wanted to be with people that didn't think exactly how I thought. There's no power in that. There's power in being challenged and in bending your protocols because somebody else has a different experience. That it creates a little bit of conflict, but it's productive conflict. It's not bad, but that's the way you make progress. I don't want to surround myself with people that do things just the way I do it.
Right. Yeah, I've also heard you guys use a terminology of we check our ego at the door, because if I come in and I'm absolutely dead set that I'm going this direction with this particular clinical protocol, you may not be the right fit for this group. Because one of the things I have seen this group do with some minor modifications is really a massive attempt to standardize what that clinical pathway looks like. And that's very tough for 9 joint surgeons from 9 different training programs and probably 7 or 8 different fellowship programs to come together. You all had fabulous training, but now you're essentially saying the 9 of us are pretty smart too. Let's keep trial and error and let's keep reading, let's keep studying, going to courses. And when somebody comes back with a better approach, let's present it to the group, let the other 8 tell you all the reasons it doesn't work, and then we'll figure out where to land and whether or not to tweak that. So, but as I think through how this group, I think one of the things the audience needs to understand is this wasn't easy. This wasn't something that you accomplished in 3 months. I think you guys invested 2 years of meetings before you even invited us into the fold. So a lot of your data, your planning, your process orientation was really started at the hospital and really focused on how do we continue to improve our processes over there while we figure out how to move the surgery center direction. And so I think one thing the audience needs to keep in mind is this wasn't 2 meetings, spend another month organizing an operating agreement and put a shovel in the ground 6 weeks later. In this particular instance, this was groundbreaking, and a lot of people thought you were crazy to do this. And so you invested a lot of time and energy and effort before you pulled the trigger.
How many hours of meetings have you been to, Chris, about OSI and our joint program?
You know what? The other Chris, gotcha. Yeah, Manson.
Yeah. No, I mean, wow. So those meetings started 6 years ago, something like that. And some of them, if I recall, were 3.5, 4 hours long. So, I mean, we did a significant, I mean, we've got, we're over 1,000 hours of meetings, just kind of talking this through and figuring this out. I mean, I think at this point, the good news, if you will, is that, there's a blueprint. There's a way to go through this. We had to kind of de novo go through it, use our hospital experience to determine what the best pathways were, what the most effective intervention strategies were, how are we going to do this. We selected the right team. We got the good team members together. We collaborated with those team members to make little tweaks for the adjustment between the hospital and the outpatient environment. And now we've got a program that works. And so I think kind of the take home is that we had to invest thousands of hours to come to the program. But now we have a program it's not something that, it's not like other teams necessarily have to go through thousands of hours, because there are groups that like ours that can do this and can pull this off. And so the template has been established. But it takes a long time. And I remember we had 2 separate meetings really kind of right a couple of months before opening, where we had discussed everything, and we got down to the final meeting of what does the order set look like, because our mantra still is and was at that time, there's going to be an OSI way to do a total knee and an OSI way to do a total hip, and it's probably not going to be the same way that any one of us actually does that case. There's going to be a change that every one of us makes in our practice, because it's going to be evidence-based. It's going to be the better way to do things, but it's going to be the one way to do things, because if you're going to do high volume outpatient joints, and particularly in a Medicare population, you need to be extremely consistent so that the care gets delivered consistently and uniformly, and that things don't get dropped because somebody made some variance from the protocol that wasn't medically indicated.
And one thing about Chris is the comment on the meeting that Chris just mentioned. It sounds a little daunting to people, but that much investment creates a foundation. So when Medicare needs hit, we met a couple of times in November, a couple of times in December, made some decisions, but the foundation was so solid that they just dropped right into our program. We didn't really change much because we already had it established, and that only came because of the back work. And that you can't overemphasize the necessity and the importance of the back work. If people just try to drop a total joint in a center that's doing hand and ACLs, you might get lucky a couple of times, but you're never going to be able to accomplish what the real goal should be, which is high volume and handling that chart that Chris showed a second ago.
Yeah, and I think to that point, so you guys probably had 5 to 6 years of time investment before you got to first case. We had about 18 months with you from initial meeting to first case. And I think the beauty of this now is that the audience members, for those sitting out there thinking, what is my next step? What do I need to do? The playbook has been developed. And the good news is we made a lot of mistakes over the last 5 or 6 years in how we did this. And so we sort of have a mantra on our team. We like to make new mistakes. We try not to make the same mistake twice. And so hopefully what we're going to share with you now will help you avoid some of those kind of mistakes. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about, and those of you that are thinking about this, really encourage you to think about traveling to Portland, Oregon, and taking part in the visiting surgeon program that Dr. Ballard and Dr. Nansen have been kind enough to offer. So let's now kind of transition to this next step, because this was we're going to talk in a minute about the clinical pathway, but you guys had some pretty strong ideas about how you wanted the facility to really lay out and how you wanted to make equipment decisions. You didn't want 4 different robotic systems, and you didn't want 3 different types of C-arms and all the things that go into setting up these types of programs. Kind of talk us through some of the unique design and construction, and I'll start with you, Dr. Nansen. Kind of talk us through some of the unique design and construction that you guys really invested on this physical plant versus either other surgery centers or hospitals that you'd actually worked in.
So yeah, that was a really big part of this. That was really one of the things that Jim and I had first talked about. We had collaborated with a local surgery center here in our local area to establish an outpatient total joints program, and it's a great surgery center. It's got a good track record, but it's built like every typical orthopedic outpatient surgery center. So the rooms are kind of in the 300 square foot category.
500. It's actually 500. Yeah. 500 square feet. Yeah.
Yeah. No, those are ours now. But the one where we started.
Oh, the old
small.
one. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Where we started, they were small, and the sterilizers. So a sterilizer run for one total joint case involved probably 7 to 10 runs through the sterilizer because it had to go 1 tray at a time. And so you have big trays, and some of those trays had to be broken down. There were all of these things that just didn't work for a center that was built to do outpatient arthroscopic cases and hand surgery. And so we learned those things as we went through that process. And we were able to do some joints at that center, and it was very successful as far as establishing clinical protocols and taking great care of our patients. But really the logistics of the thing and thinking about 2 total joint surgeons building a surgery center to just do total joints in, there were a lot of things that needed to change. And so our 500 square foot operating rooms are connecting doors to a back substerile corridor where we have all of our storage available. The fact that we probably have 3 to 4 times the amount of storage space that most facilities have because we have big things to store. We have a giant hospital-sized sterilization department with capacity to double that if needed in the future. These were all things that we built into the design of the center. And this is one of the things that, as you were saying, Chris, that people called us crazy. They looked at it and they looked at the kind of the tag on, the price tag on this center and what we wanted to do and what we wanted to build. And they looked at me and Jim and they go, "You're a couple of total joint surgeons. You don't know anything about ambulatory surgery centers. You want to build the Taj Mahal. Like, what the heck? This is going to be 2.5 times what it should cost to build an ambulatory surgery center." And then we found another crazy individual in Chris Bishop here, and he's our kind of crazy, and we've got our great facility that's doing high volume total joints, and we have enough space and enough capacity, and we can do this safely. We run a hospital-sized SPD department, and that's what we needed to do what we do. And we have hospital-sized operating rooms because we're doing what used to be hospital-sized cases. So,
Dr. Ballard reminds you and I frequently that he holds the record for 8 joint replacements in a day right now at the center. But and I know you're right close there yourself, Dr. Nansen. But Dr. Ballard, it was one of the things that you guys sort of talked about was, in addition to the initial square footage that we built, which was about 14,000 square feet, it was important to you to have some expansion space because when you opened, you knew 70% wasn't the target. When you opened, it was probably more in the 30 to 50% range, but you knew that that was very likely going to expand as your expertise improved. Without going too deep into the golf simulator that you guys installed in the back in the shell space, kind of talk through the overnight recovery potential, additional ORs, and how the physicians sort of designed the space to expand so that you could accommodate more patients in the future, and the importance of that.
When we first laid the plans down, Medicare wasn't even making any public statements about these little hips going over, and frankly, at the time, that wasn't even in our calculus. We just knew we had a sense, and didn't make us rocket scientists. We had a sense things were going to change. And this was so successful and made so much macroeconomic sense for the healthcare world in general. We had a sense it would change. We just didn't know how. So we built something that had 3 ORs, that had big hallways, all the stuff that Chris talked about. But then we have about 3,500 or 4,000 square feet in the back. And we thought, well, maybe we'll get a 72-hour stay capacity. Maybe we'll build the nurses station there. Maybe our volume will go up and we'll build more operating rooms. We never thought about Medicare. But now, again, going back to hammer on the point over and over again, the standardization, the foundation, we have almost never had an overnight stay. We're coming up to our 1,000th joint, and the couple that we've had have been outliers. So we now don't really, and then the Medicare hit in January. We've done a lot of Medicare knees, and they ironically do better than commercial knees. So they're not staying overnight. So now we don't need an overnight stay. We had that option. Now what we need, because Medicare is going to push hips, and maybe the inpatient list goes away, and maybe simple revisions will be able to come over. Now we're going to use that space for more operating rooms.
Yep. So, Dr. Ballard, thank you for that. I'm going to come to you next on this, really transitioning here from the design of the facility to, really what is most critical. You referenced me as the solution. It wasn't me. It was truly, we apply about 17 people from our team to construct and open a surgery center. And then there's probably a dozen or so that are providing services for the center on a go-forward basis to ensure that we're maximizing every step of the way. But it always comes down to people. If it were just me, you guys would be in trouble. But I have a lot of people smarter than me on the team that are experts in all these different segments. It's the same on the clinical side. So talk us through a little bit the importance, because you guys really introduced a unique concept that we had never seen at any of our other locations, this concept of an orthopedic coordinator. And the first one was so good that you decided to hire the other 3. So talk the audience through building the clinical team, and then maybe touch on, at least in this particular instance, the health loop, but how you were able to really secure some leadership to address that patient before and after the case, so that you guys can do what you do best, which is surgery. So
Chris and I knew when we set up the hospital program, we had 4 nurses that became leaders of this program, and they learned a lot. They're incredibly smart, very talented. They know a lot more about what they do than me and Chris do. And we knew how integral they were from an education standpoint. They see the world differently because they're nurses. From a patient integration, family integration, recovery, flow, everything. We knew how important they were. So when we opened, we hired some of them to come bring that over to our setting. So it's interesting because it's so important to hire capable, smart people and then to let them operate at the top of their license. You got to let these people be smart and use all of their talents to the full extent of their license. And I don't think a lot of centers hire orthopedic coordinators, but what Chris and I do would never happen without these incredibly talented people. And we brought them over, and then they took their talents and they just run with this, and we've let them develop, and we listen to them. When they have something to say, trust me, we pay attention. And when they want to morph and change things, they're at the meeting, and they are just as important to me as Chris is, or you are, or an anesthesiologist is. And so hiring them, trusting them, and letting them go and do what they do, it's at a point now after, and this goes into recovery nurses, the person who's our administrator, hiring smart people, paying for them, right? Surgeons have a phobia of paying for anything, which is a business killer. So they aren't cheap, but they are worth, I hope they're not listening, they're worth more than what we pay them, right? They're amazing. If you're listening to this, no, I'm just kidding. So it's so vital. So now when Chris and I operate, I mean, really, and Chris will tell you this, I do a case, I think my orders take me 5 seconds. I say hi to people and do some social rounds, and I leave. And they take care of everything better than I probably ever could on my own.
Yeah, I use the example sometimes of, surgeons, you guys are and ladies are sort of uniquely designed to think that you can do everything, but what is best use of your time? I'm guessing that you two don't sit down in April and start banging out your tax return. You probably have an accountant that does that for you. So why should you sit down and spend an inordinate amount of time with a patient explaining to them in a joint camp format, or a joint educational class? You spend enough time in that exam room to identify that they have a need, that you can address that need, and then you're able to hand them off to the nurse in your office, who then hands them off to the orthopedic coordinator in the surgery center. And that's for a patient. When I'm in a physician's, I'll ask my few questions, but a lot of times I get a lot more answers from your nurse when I'm sitting in that exam room, because I almost feel guilty asking too many questions of my physician. So every one of your patients have questions they don't have the answer and they don't feel comfortable asking you. So having that patient resource is huge.
But
go ahead, please.
It's really important that it isn't just that Chris and I, if we tried to do everything, that would be insane, obviously. But these ladies are better at what they do than he or I would be at doing it.
Right.
The only thing Chris and I are the best at in this center is operating. Right? Everybody else is better at what they do than we could do if we did it ourselves. So, and that's an important point. And to let go of that as a surgeon and go, man, you're better at that than me. How about you do that? And I'll just kind of stay out of your way and give you some general guidance. What do you think about that, Nancy?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's the way I explain it to my patients and is I tell them, I say, listen, a lot of patients will have a little bit of a hesitancy to do an outpatient arthroplasty, and you just kind of explain it to them. You go, listen, this is an outpatient procedure no matter what the setting is. But what I can do at my center is I can essentially surround you with virtual bubble wrap. Like, we surround you with so many care providers and so many tools to get your questions answered and to maintain connectivity with your care team, that you are going to feel completely and totally supported. And you're going to feel more supported if you go through this pathway at our surgery center than you will at the hospital, because we offer so much more than the hospital offers. So when we use the Get Well loops, the patient engagement software, which, pick a company, but the patient engagement software that allows them to send pictures, text messages, have instant communication. Our coordinators are so good that patients will send in questions on the weekends. The coordinators are not supposed to check those messages after hours on the weekends. Patients will get messages back on Saturday and Sunday. If there's a significant concern, I'll get a text message on Saturday from one of the joint coordinators. It would never bother me unless there was something significant that needs to happen. But that's the kind of connectivity and patient care that we can have that's really almost 24/7 connectivity for the patients. And they've got instant questions just answered online. It's convenient. It's easy. It's from the comfort of their own home. They don't have to schedule another appointment and drive in to have a wound check. We can do a live virtual wound check. Pre-pandemic, we were doing live virtual wound checks for our patients. It's really the whole concept centers on the coordinator because they are the managers of the program. And so we are the designers of the program as the surgeons and the physicians. They are the managers of the program, and they can manage this way better than we ever could, like Jim was saying. And so that is really kind of the fundamental keystone of this piece, that we can safely pull this off for the patients. And this goes back to Jim's comment on, well, when Medicare knees hit January 1, we hit the ground running because we didn't really have to change anything. We already had a very robust clinical pathway that follows these patients through their postoperative course of care, and we didn't really have to adjust much.
And what that does, Chris, is it drops. So you look at readmission rates historically from the hospital, or, being in the 8 to 9% range. Our readmission rate and our issue rate postoperatively is extraordinarily low. Like almost when we present this data, people are going to think we're faking it, but we're not. And it's low because of everything we've just talked about. And spending the money and finding the people and trusting them is, in the end, not just good for me and Chris. It's what's best for the people that we bring here. And it lets them go through and I think ultimately have a better experience all the way around than they could anywhere else.
So we have surgery centers that are multi-specialty surgery centers that do joints. It's superior care. It's a great patient and physician experience. But there's no question that the more volume you do of a specific type of procedure, the better the team becomes, almost like a well-oiled NASCAR team that can get a car in and out in 30 seconds and get tires changed and all the things that they have to do. So, that's one of the beauties of this model. Talk to me, Dr. Ballard. I'm going to come to you on this question. Dr. Nansen was really talking about the importance of the nurses and the clinical staff. Anesthesia is such a critical part of this, and I can tell you as a very satisfied joint replacement patient personally, the anesthesiologist ensured that I didn't feel much right before my procedure, and I didn't feel anything for 48 to 72 hours after. Talk our audience through how your group sort of came to a standardized, because again, with 9 joint surgeons, you probably initially had 9 different anesthesia protocols. Talk through what your current protocol is and how that's evolved over the last couple of years.
So to start with, in a lot of places, unfortunately, the anesthesia-surgeon relationship is more adversarial than collaborative. So Chris and I, this goes back to the hospital, we have been working with our anesthesiologist very closely for a lot of years and developing protocols that initially were just meant for the hospital, but we knew eventually would transition over. And like every surgeon listening to this podcast or to this webcast, we knew who was outstanding at it. And so we brought them in and said, please, we want you to come work here. And then when we did that, we made them the medical directors, and we picked 2 surgeons that are anesthesiologists, brought them in, and we made them part of the decision team, again, because obviously they do anesthesia better than me. I don't do that. And I don't have any feeling that I know more about it than they do. But we leaned heavily on their experience. We leaned heavily on their expertise. And they had their experience they brought to us, not just from the hospital, from other surgery center experience. And so that's how we came up with our protocols for both hips and knees. And they continue to this day to be part of these discussions. And we continue to refine how we do things. And we're constantly chipping away at it to kind of make slight improvements. And I think we've gotten to a place now where it's fantastic. And what happens is They can't be there all the time. There are other anesthesiologists that are fabulous. When they show up to OSI, just as Chris said, there's an OSI knee and an OSI hip. There is an OSI anesthetic for a knee and an OSI anesthetic for a hip. And when you come to anesthesia at our place, that's the way you do it. It doesn't really matter how you do it anywhere else. And I don't care that you like X, Y, or Z at your place. This is how you do it. And that provides a lot of continuity and allows that to continue even when they're not there.
Okay. So, Dr. Nance, I'm going to come to you on this because we've actually had a couple questions from the audience come in specific to anesthesia. What is your current protocol? How are you currently addressing that patient from a clinical perspective for our clinicians in the audience?
Yeah, our protocols have been designed to minimize our complications, minimize our post-operative side effects. One of our anesthesiologists, we had one of our recovery room nurses came to us, and she has 20 years of experience in the recovery room, and she's worked at every hospital in town and about half the surgery centers. And so she comes to our place and works with us, and she'd been working with us for about 2 weeks, and she walked up to one of our medical director anesthesiologists, and she says, why do people wake up so well here? I don't get it. She goes, I know you're a good doctor. I know you're a good anesthesiologist. I know we have good surgeons, but there's good anesthesiologists and good surgeons at everywhere that I've ever worked, and I've never seen anybody wake up this well. And our medical director anesthesiologist looks at her. He goes, well, it's simple. We just don't give them any anesthesia. And so his comment was tongue in cheek, but the point is that what we don't do is we don't do heavy doses of intravenous narcotics. What we don't do is we don't pre-medicate with Versed. We rely heavily on regional anesthesia. And for a knee, what that means is that they get an adductor canal block administered under ultrasound. They get an IPAC, posterior capsular field block, administered under ultrasound, and that's after general anesthesia is induced with an LMA and a continuous propofol drip. Most of the knees will get about 25 to 50 micrograms of fentanyl through the case. That is a very low dose of intravenous narcotic. For a hip, the protocol exists of 1 milliliter of 0.5% plain bupivacaine. That's it. So they will get a propofol drip with an LMA throughout the case for general IV anesthesia. They will generally get 0 fentanyl during the case. And so One of the things that we've followed, and particularly for our hips, is we're finding that 60% of our hip replacement patients at the surgery center never receive a narcotic in any way, shape, or form throughout their entire experience, from the time they walk in the door on the day of surgery until they are completely declared recovered from our office 6 weeks later. So by eliminating the heavy drugs, the benzodiazepines, the intravenous narcotics, what we've done is we've created a situation where we have extremely low side effect rates. And so our hypotension, our nausea, vomiting, pain crisis, all of that just really is exceedingly low. And the small amount of side effects that we do have are very, very manageable in outpatient settings, so that the patient can still successfully transition to home. And so that's been a really huge part in doing that, and selecting those medical directors that are good at doing this type of anesthesia and have good relationships with their colleagues, so that they can actually take a vacation and we can still rely on our anesthesia program. And so they have those good communication skills to talk to their colleagues and say, listen, this is how we do it. We've selected people that have good peripheral anesthesia skills, and that's how they go through it. And so that's our current protocol. That's currently how we're doing that. That's all topped with a periarticular injection that currently consists of Exparel, Toradol, and plain bupivacaine expanded with normal saline to a 100 cc volume.
Great answer. Dr. Ballard, anything you want to add to that?
No, and it's that absence of IV narcotic, and these people do wake up in ways that you'd think we were joking. You just have to see it. It's tremendous. And again, it's not mostly from me and Chris, it's from our anesthesia colleagues.
So okay, thank you for that. So what I have seen in the few meetings that I've been able to join you guys for over the last 18 months is, just because it's working really well right now, you don't stop continuing to innovate. And that's so critical, because what works well today may not work well tomorrow. So you guys are continuing to innovate. I've seen you trial for 3 months a different approach so that you can compare your results and figure out, does this minor adjustment help our patients to wake up faster, to feel less pain, to have better pain scores 3 days post-op. So I think that's kind of a good segue now to this fourth step that I wanted for us to kind of finish on, which is continued refinement of the clinical pathway. And I think that the example that I'd like for you to really touch on, and I'll come to you, Dr. Ballard, on this, is what I sort of refer to as the Holy Grail. If I ask 9 joint surgeons what implant system they use, I'm probably going to get 9 different answers. It may be 6 different medical device manufacturers, but 9 different systems. So one of the beautiful things about the surgery center world is you guys as owners are financially incentivized to introduce economics into the clinical decision-making and into that clinical pathway. And unfortunately, oftentimes in the hospital, you're good community citizens, but there's really no penalty and there's really no reward to use more cost-effective systems. Even if they may be, in terms of outcomes, they may accomplish the same outcome. So can you kind of talk us through when Medicare came out with their low knee replacement reimbursement? I wouldn't say any of us were shocked by that number. We kind of knew we were going to receive a number that we felt like was unreasonable. But when that came out, it was around $9,000. Obviously, less than half of what we are experiencing with the commercial payers. You guys organized, as I recall, back in October, there was an initial conversation, and then there was sort of the, bring food and nobody's leaving until we make this decision in November. Talk through how you guys approached the implant decision for Medicare patients, because it became obvious that from an economic perspective, it was possible that we were going to lose money on every Medicare knee unless you made some minor adjustments to the clinical pathway, one of which was convincing the group to standardize to an implant system. Kind of talk through that decision-making process, because that was a very unique outcome.
Yeah. So when the Medicare number came down, I mean, it was disappointing, but you can either cry about it or you can figure it out. So Chris and I decided we would just figure it out. So back to the benefit of being standardized is that we know our cost, and we've got our cost for soft goods and non-implant costs down really, really low. So we knew what that was. And then for the implants, we just put out an RFP and told implant companies, both ones you would know and some you would have never known existed, what we wanted. And we had an RFP, and we all decided to go agnostic, which we did because we all have companies that we like. Chris and I use implant companies that are different from each other. And they all came in with their offering, and we made a choice, and we all adopted that. We leveraged our volume to adopt that system for that company. And I think all the companies thought we would never do it. And when we did it, and we all moved our Medicare business to that implant, it stirred up a bit of an issue with the other companies, and it's created good changes for us in other areas. But again, it's a mindset thing. It is the program and the ecosystem of the center over my ego or Chris's ego or my relationship in industry or Chris's or anybody else's. And when you have that mindset, and of course we picked a great implant. We're not going to pick a terrible implant. Right. That would be morally problematic. So we picked a great implant with a good history, got a great deal on it. And we make more money out of the Medicare knee than we do on most cases that you think would be great outpatient sports cases. So they're a good case for us. And when I bring a Medicare knee, we're happy about it.
Well, this implant you use, I know has 25-year results that are phenomenal. So it's a great product for a Medicare patient. Dr. Manson, anything that you want to add to that? Because that was a very unique experience. Anything else that kind of comes to mind through that process? Or I know you were one of the guys that had to switch to a different implant system. How did you land there?
Yeah, it's it's like Jim said. It's kind of part of who the two of us have been throughout this journey. Was making adjustments, as we really needed to affect patient care. And so our attitude was, because we can offer so much more to the patient at OSI, we want to offer OSI to our Medicare patients. We want to bring our Medicare patients through this program because, quite honestly, I think it's a superior clinical pathway to what any hospital offers. And I think my patients that go through OSI do better than my hospital patients from a standpoint of their safety and their availability to ask questions and interact with their care team. And that's reflected in the fact that we have 98% patient satisfaction. There's no hospital program that has that. So, I mean, it's important to offer that pathway. And so, but to offer that pathway at the rate that Medicare came in with, and I have to, Jim says, well, we could cry about it, or we could. I freely admit I spent 2 weeks crying about it first. But at that point, it was, well, we've got a problem and we've got to solve it. And so, what do we do? And so, we selected an implant system that was, I thought, creative from our vendor, and I think it provided us with the satisfaction of having something that was the top-selling knee implant system in the world for 20 years running. And you can't really say that that's a bad product. We've got 20, 25 years worth of data, as you said, that, this is not a bad product. I have used it in the past. It's user-friendly. It works great. Our patients have been highly satisfied. They're getting an excellent knee arthroplasty product at a price that's compatible with what Medicare has been willing to pay. And like Jim said, that, for us, from a financial standpoint, that has worked out exceedingly well. I think as we go in and work forward, now we're in week 2 of our discussions about Medicare hips, as we know those are probably very likely to hit the market in January. Our willingness to standardize and make those tough decisions and check our egos at the door so that we can offer this great patient care to our patients has really simplified our Medicare total hip discussions for January already.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, guys, I'm going to do something here that I've never done before because we actually have several really good questions. We're going to go speed round for about 4 minutes here before we close this out. So I'm going to keep you 30 seconds or less on these questions. One question is COVID-19. How are you seeing a difference in your patients? Do you have patients asking to be done in the surgery center or more likely refusing to be done in the hospital? Dr. Ballard.
Most of my patients, I don't even talk about the hospital if they're outpatient eligible. So it hasn't made a huge difference to me because I've already got them down that pathway, but no doubt it has encouraged it because it only makes sense. So it's taken something that's already moving and kind of given an extra push.
Excellent. Thank you for that. How many days post-op do you follow your patients?
Nansen.
I see my patients at 2 weeks and 6 weeks and 6 months, and then I have them come back about every 3 years for a routine check-in. So we kind of have a long-term follow-up. Our center follows for 90 days.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Ballard, if I were in a state that did not allow overnight stay, and yours does not allow overnight stay, but I have patients coming from a large geographic region, how would you manage those patients? I know you referenced earlier in our talks how you manage those patients.
So being in Portland, Chris and I and the other surgeons, we pull patients in from upwards of 6 hours away. So we operate on them. What we do is we have an arrangement with a hotel, a nice hotel near the center, and we bring the people in with their family member. We pay for them to stay in the hotel the night before. They come to the center, they discharge, they go back to the hotel, and then the next morning they get up, they check in with us, and then they go home. We have people as far as 3 or 4 hours away that have opted to drive home and have done fine. But anybody that has any distance, and I've done 6 and 7 hours, we put them up in a hotel. Again, it comes back to the hesitance to spend money, right? Trust me, to bring a Blue Cross joint to our center and pay a couple $100 for hotel stay is no big deal.
Agreed. All right, Dr. Nansen, patient selection criterion for a surgery center versus a hospital, is it standardized? Do you guys have a little different approach by physician? How does that work?
So our patient selection criteria is obviously anybody with major organ system dysfunction is going to be a hospital patient. Anybody that's going to need high intensive hospital level care and medical monitoring after surgery is going to need to go to the hospital. So significant kidney issues, significant cardiac issues, significant pulmonary issues, they have to go. Everything else is a taker. And our exclusion list is really weird. Our exclusion list is not a big list of medical conditions that exclude you from the center. Our exclusion list is more likely, do you have somebody that likes you enough to take care of you after your total joint? Do you have a safe home environment to return to? Do you have access to this kind of network of care support that you're going to need at home? So our exclusion criteria are really more social in nature than they are medical in nature. I think the medical stuff's kind of obvious. Our medical directors are really good at picking things out, and we have an array of specialists that we've arranged to kind of help us stabilize patients and make sure they're safe for surgery. So,
okay, good. And a follow on to that just came through, discharge criterion.
We have a physical therapist that we employ at the center that we pay them a per case fee. So the therapist works with them twice before they go home. We have a simulated staircase in the center. There's a distance they have to walk. They have to be able to transfer safely. Importantly, even during COVID, while the family isn't there with them because of COVID at the beginning, when the therapy starts, we bring the family in so they can be a participant in the therapy, mostly so they can see how possible it is, but also to help them know what to do when they get home. But we have therapists and we have our orthopedic coordinators that have done this a zillion times, and they make sure their mobility is good enough to do all those basic things, then they go.
So in our 2 minutes, thank you for that, Dr. Ballard. In our 2 minutes left, unfortunately, I don't have time to finish some of the other questions, but here's what I'm going to recommend. For anybody that is thinking about doing this, or even has started and you're doing 5% of your patients and you think 70% is crazy, if I could make a recommendation, Portland, Oregon, I've been in the airport in 2 different markets over the last 2 weeks out west. So it's a reasonable market to fly to, even from the southeast where I live. I really would encourage you, because a 60-minute presentation, although very helpful, there's so many little tools and tips and techniques. And what we find with our surgeons that travel there, dinner Thursday night with one or both of these guys, and then scrubbing in to watch, or scrubbing out, I should say, to watch a few of these cases being done, 4 or 5 on a Friday morning. You will pick up so many tips and techniques at that dinner conversation and at the sink. It's not just the intraoperative. It's so many elements around it. Meeting the orthopedic coordinators, that I really can't stress enough the visiting surgeon program and the capabilities that you will take away from that will, I believe, build your confidence to either shift into an ambulatory setting or expand your patient inclusion criterion. Because really, this is the best setting for most of your patients to have their joint replacement if you have put all these elements in place. So 1 minute left. Dr. Ballard, I'll start with you. 2030, what's your crazy concept for joint replacements in 2030 that in 2010, you never thought you'd be doing 60, 70% of your patients at a surgery center. Where are we at in 2030?
My crazy concept in 2030, which is not crazy, is I will be an outpatient surgeon only.
There you go.
I'll be towards the end of my career. I probably won't be taking on the crazy revisions that I do now, but I, without doubt, will be doing almost all, if not all, of my work in an outpatient setting. I think we're going to be doing revision work in outpatient settings. Chris and I have already done revisions in the outpatient arena. I think it's going to open up more and more as we see how possible it is.
I love it. Thank you. Dr. Nansen, 2030.
So yeah, I would echo Dr. Ballard's comment. I think that's probably going to happen well before 2030. I think technology-wise, I think there's a lot of promise in surgical robotics, and we've invested in that times two at our center. And I think that as that progresses and that technology continues, I think we potentially are looking at some kind of a remote surgical type operation that kind of requires a surgeon to expose and set up while the robot then kind of does some of the work for you. So there are some systems like that out there. They're just haven't really figured that out, but I think we're going to be probably thinking about more remote surgery just to be able to handle the crush of volume and the cost. So.
Yeah, if our cars can drive us to the office or church or synagogue, then it's very likely that there is a time in the not too distant future when robotics helps us perform surgeries. So, all right. Well, with that, I would really like to thank the audience for joining us today. A lot of questions came through. Truly appreciate that. I wish we could have gotten to all of them. Dr. Ballard, Dr. Nansen, thanks for carving time out of your clinic and operating room today to join us. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, guys. That is all the time we have for today. I would like to thank you guys from Becker's, Chris, Dr. Ballard, and Dr. Nansen for their excellent presentation, and also Regent Surgical Health for sponsoring today's session. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you for future Becker sessions.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.